Hello, good day to you, and welcome to my channel. My name is John. I'm also known as Sorafin when I'm online. And today I would like to talk about the comparisons that people have been making between Chris Nolan's Odyssey and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'd like to begin by saying, if you have watched the Odyssey, I hope you enjoyed it. And the same with anybody who plans to watch the Odyssey. I hope you enjoy it. I think that cinemas are probably overpriced these days, so I don't want anyone wasting their money and also their time. As for me, I have zero intention of watching Nolan's Odyssey. I do not care that it exists. Don't get me wrong, it's not just the Odyssey I reject, it's 99% of modern cinema and television. One of the few exceptions that I would like to mention now is Hunt for the Wilderpeople, which was made around 10 years ago and it stars Sam Neill. Unfortunately, Sam Neill passed away last week, and I'm incredibly sad about that because growing up, he was one of my favourite actors. I was a fan of dinosaurs, and he starred in Jurassic Park, of course. I mention Hunt for the Wilderpeople because it's my favourite Sam Neill film. I think it was actually Sam Neill's favourite film as well to actually make. It's a fun movie. It's a New Zealand movie, and I would absolutely recommend to anyone to watch that film. Anyway, what I'm here to talk about are what I believe are ridiculous comparisons between the Odyssey and Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I believe are delusional claims which come from Inception-infected Nolan cultists who they actually have their head shoved so far up his ass that they've turned into interstellar tapeworms. Sorry for the poor joke, but there won't be any more of those. But that's the way I see it, is that they see that Nolan can do no wrong, and he should be free of criticism. The world does not work like that. But that's, modern cinema is not the only reason I won't watch this film. His casting choices, his words, I think, in his promotional interview are what put me off completely regarding the dialogue. But also, one massive reason as to why I would not watch the film is because the trailer bored me. I grew up watching films such as Jason and the Argonauts, the original Clash of the Titans, Willow, The Never-Ending Story. Just things from a child's perspective. They felt like epic storytelling. And the Odyssey should have been something that I actually wanted to see. But instead, through my eyes now, it just looks like another soulless Hollywood exercise. And as for the cast, I don't particularly rate them. They're just flavours of the month to me. I don't see them as character actors, I see them as celebrities. But I'll go into that a little bit later. But these endless claims that Nolan's Odyssey is his Lord of the Rings, that it's going to have the same, if not a bigger cultural impact, that's got to be one of the most laughable statements I've heard in modern film. In all film, actually. Because now I've got to compare them. In terms of quality, I probably wouldn't be able to, but people have said about the cultural impact, so I am going to compare the two. And to do that, I've got to go back to the start. And why the films were made. What reasons the directors had. Peter Jackson made The Lord of the Rings because he loved Tolkien's work. He wanted to bring Middle-earth to life. He wanted other people to see Tolkien's work. Nolan chose The Odyssey because apparently there was a gap in Hollywood. and he thought it would play well to modern audiences, and he's constantly desperate to try and impress them. And that is a massive difference there. Jackson wanted Middle Earth to be real. Nolan just wanted to make a Nolan film. And at the start, Jackson was fighting uphill the entire time. He had Harvey Weinstein on his back, trying to convince him that he had to condense 3 massive books into one single film. Everyone knows that would have been stupid. Back then, fantasy was treated like a joke, and Jackson had to build an entire living, breathing world from Tolkien's words, and he had to do so with technology that was still catching up. With technology that didn't even exist. They literally had to create new things from the start to make those films. And on top of that, Jackson had a difficult era to compete in. It was like the blockbuster films that were coming out around that time were huge. We had the likes of Gladiator, the first of the Harry Potters, Spider-Man, X-Men, The Matrix, Saving Private Ryan had come out not long before, Armageddon. These were the kinds of films that were selling. Anything like Lord of the Rings, no, it was no go. They literally had no budget. People wouldn't take them seriously. What dominated the box office back then was very, very different. And Jackson wasn't a household name. He came from horror. The only film I think I'd watched before then that Jackson had made was something called Brain Dead or Dead Alive. I accidentally saw it when I was a kid. And trust me, that film is unique. I've got about 20 different visions going through my head right now of things. Some of the things that are said in that film are, they're pretty special, all right. And if you watched it, you would not believe that it was from the same guy who made Lord of the Rings. I think Peter Jackson's most famous film before Lord of the Rings to most people would have been The Frighteners, starring Michael J. Fox, which is a fun film. It's not for everyone. I thought it was fun. And that's the thing. He came from horror, and yet he still delivered something that felt ancient, epic, and alive all at the same time. He succeeded. Start with Nolan's beginning point with Odyssey. Nolan already has his reputation doing more than half of the work. Modern technology is there. He has a huge budget and an audience that is going to show up because it says Nolan on the poster. Jackson didn't have that. You had Jackson on Lord of the Rings, and that would have meant nothing to most people. That's the reality of it. So the starting points are, that's, are they comparable? No, Nolan has their massive head start there. And this idea that now, I've got to imagine 25 years from now, because we've got 25 years of Lord of the Rings history. So in 25 years, I've got to imagine that people are still going to be quoting this Odyssey film, that the soundtrack is getting sold out orchestral performances all over the world, and that fans are going to be chasing the actors around the world for autographs because they were so believable as these characters. I've also got to believe that the merchandise is going to move in serious numbers because the Lord of the Rings films, they bring in tens of millions every single year. And that in 20 years from now, that Amazon are going to go, well, time to milk the Odyssey, time to make a TV show, time to, because that's what Amazon did with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. It's not through Tolkien's work that they're trying to make money, it's through Peter Jackson. They wanted that ready-made audience that Jackson had built. They didn't care about the book fan base. This Rings of Power nonsense. Awful attempt. Oh, I hate that it exists. And to be honest, most of the time I forget it exists. But yeah, you're telling me that this Odyssey film is going to achieve all that? No. Wrong. Incorrect. The Odyssey is not going to achieve a sniff of any of that. You know, you look at Weta Workshop. I think they've worked on the Odyssey, but their biggest seller is still going to remain Lord of the Rings. To this day, they are still making prop replicas. They are making models of the characters, of the scenery from the films, and jewelry as well. And it makes them loads of money. I'm sure that the Odyssey will have a few bits of merchandise over the next couple of years, but I promise in 5 years that merchandise is not going to exist because not enough people are going to be buying it. So let's talk about the worlds themselves, because this is where the comparison dies completely. The Lord of the Rings, Jackson's Lord of the Rings, built a world that was so convincing that you could actually, it felt like you could smell the dirt. You felt the cold and the heat with the characters. You felt the weight of the armor, or the heaviness of the one ring. Middle Earth was brought to life through amazing practical sets. You watch the extras on the DVDs of how these things were built, and they're just incredible. And also the locations that they scouted to use for these films, and how they got everything to them. And also the handcrafted costumes that actually meant something. They actually felt like they had a history in their costumes. You could look at any character in Middle-earth, you could just see them, and you can pinpoint where this person in Middle-earth was from just by how they were dressed, just by the uniqueness of the designs. You compare the Rohan armor compared to the Gondor armor. They both look amazing, but you can identify which one is which. And this started this massive idea in fantasy that they could be huge in the manner that they are. I mean, Game of Thrones, you could tell that was influenced, not just George R.R. Martin by Tolkien, but actually the TV show was influenced by the Lord of the Rings films. But you look at the elven cloaks, and when you saw the cloaks, the green cloaks that the Fellowship have, you were wearing one as well. You had one of those. That every single culture in Middle-earth has its own visual language. It felt real, it felt ancient, it felt alive. Nolan's Odyssey, does it have any of that? I won't watch the film. I won't ever watch this film, but what I have seen are stills. I have seen trailers, I have seen clips, and it doesn't look anywhere near as good. It doesn't feel alive. It looks boring. It looks generic. The costumes, right? They look like expensive cosplay that was designed by a bunch of suits in a boardroom, but they were actually crafted in a toilet where Mr. and Mrs. Wikipedia live. I don't know what I mean by that. I just imagine that Wikipedia was started in a toilet somewhere, maybe. Well, that's what it is now. Anyway, there was no weight, there was no texture, there was no sense of history in these costumes, and they ultimately had a head start because although it's it's a story, a mythological story, fantasy and myths are they're two entirely different things, and ancient Greece. The ancient Greece actually existed. So what they have is a head start, and countless different versions to go from. You just look at different films and say what worked and what didn't work. And honestly, I can't tell from the images one group from another by their armor or clothing, because everything, it just all blends in together and it feels generic, modern looking. It's sludge. It's horrible. is the best way to describe it. But the worst thing is that it does not feel like an ancient world at all. And it just feels like another big budget Hollywood movie that's spent a fortune trying to look epic, but completely fails to make anything feel real or believable. I'm going to move on to the performances now, and in Lord of the Rings, I believe that they were career defining. The actors didn't just show up and read lines, the actors became those characters. We believed that Viggo Mortensen was Aragorn, and we believed that Sean Astin was Sam, that Sir Ian McKellen, was Gandalf. And even though we'd seen Christopher Lee in 100 movies before, he was Saruman. He betrayed Gandalf. It felt real. These actors made an incredible job of what they were doing. And even the smaller roles felt like real people who belonged in the world. And I'll have to use a bit of examples from Nolan's other films here. Well, I'll just go off of them anyway. But it kind of feels like the performances are always secondary to Nolan's vision. In every Nolan film I have watched, the main character has been Nolan. The actors are there just to serve whatever mumbo jumbo he has them doing. Matt Damon playing Odysseus will just be Matt Damon in a costume, doing Matt Damon things. It's not going to feel mythic. He certainly doesn't look it. And he certainly does not sound it. It'll just feel like another Nolan project. And many of the characters in Nolan films, they are unmemorable, unfortunately. And here's the worst of it. And that is the dialogue. His comments on the dialogue, they're unforgivable. His dialogue choices are genuinely, they're awful. He decided that characters in an ancient Greek epic should talk like they're in a modern blockbuster. He went out of his way to say he wanted language that has, emotional, not intellectual meaning. Sorry, I'm just going to have a drink of water. Yeah, so he that line alone, he actually believes that making everyone speak in flat contemporary English is going to make people feel more emotional and earthy. But instead, everything just sounds cheap, modern, and completely wrong for the story that he is supposed to be telling us. It kills any sense of myth or escapism that the film is supposed to offer. I don't want to be hearing that in films. I want to believe the character. That's the trick. This is a trick. When you present a piece of art, so like a film or a TV series and that, to the audience, you have to make them believe that that character belongs in the world that you are showing them. Nolan completely loses that just by dialogue choices alone. Like his idea of a powerful dialogue is apparently if Darth Vader was talking to Luke, Darth would have said, "I'm your daddy," because apparently father isn't emotional, and that is one of the most iconic lines in cinematic history. It wouldn't have worked if Darth Vader would have said dad or daddy. Father is more emotional, and the fact that Nolan doesn't recognize that is mind-boggling. that the Lord of the Rings has dialogue that feels elevated, but it still feels natural because it belongs in the world that it's in. It's got weight. It has emotion that lands. Nolan doesn't have any of that apparently. He ended up with dialogue that feels like it was written by somebody who's never felt emotion in their life. Reflect back to the mines of Moria. Frodo has just wished death upon Gollum, and Gandalf tells him even the very wise cannot see all ends, and not to be so eager to deal out death and judgment. And Frodo says that I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened. How would Nolan write Gandalf's response to that? How would he actually write it? Because for a modern audience, Gandalf's response, I'm probably going to misquote it here, but it's something along the lines of, "So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us." And then he says about, Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and in turn, you were also meant to have it, and that's an encouraging thought. How would Nolan have written that line? Because he wouldn't have it like that, would he? And that's the difference. Like, what would Nolan have said? For Gandalf, nah, it's just tough luck for Frodo. Just deal with it, yeah. I don't know what Nolan would have done, but it wouldn't have been good anyway. And that's the difference. The Lord of the Rings is unforgettable. Decades later, people still talk about specific scenes, they quote specific lines, and remember the different moments that have hit them emotionally. You can't say the same about most Nolan films. Especially once that initial hype dies down. I mean, there's certain parts in Interstellar or Dark Knights, that they are good. I'm not going to deny that. But are they as memorable as anything from the Lord of the Rings trilogy? The answer is no. Nolan is technically impressive. He's very stylish. But also his work fades. And the Odyssey is going to do that as well. In 5 years, it'll just be that Nolan film with Matt Damon. And that's it. It's not going to have the staying power that Lord of the Rings has had. In 25 years, Lord of the Rings, this trilogy that Jackson made, is still going to matter. In 5 years, Nolan's Odyssey isn't. And that's the massive thing. The comparison to say that this is Nolan's Lord of the Rings is a desperate reach. It's not real. It is nowhere near going to be on the same level, regardless of how much money it's going to make. It's going to make a fortune. It might make $1 billion. I don't know. But it's not going to have the lasting cultural impact that Lord of the Rings has. People aren't going to go to Greece to imitate journeys from that film. There's fans from Lord of the Rings who go to New Zealand. They go to Matamata, and they will dress as hobbits. They'll dress as characters. People get married there. They literally have the most important part of their lives. One of the most important moments. They go to New Zealand because of Lord of the Rings for it. And then you got some people who will walk from Matamata, and then they'll go all the way down past I think it's Lake Taupo, and they'll go through I think it's Tongariro National Park to climb Mount Naori, I think it's pronounced, and because that's where the One Ring was destroyed. They'll imitate that journey. People are not going to do that because of the Odyssey. It's not going to happen, especially 25 years from now. And I have absolute no doubt that Hollywood are going to shower Nolan with awards for the Odyssey. They're probably making them now. Like, there's probably someone shining them, going, "Oh, I can't wait to hand this to Chris." And the thing is, these days awards have completely lost their meaning. They're just participation trophies, and they're handed out to whatever Hollywood thinks is the most important social issue that year. Back when Lord of the Rings came out, there was massive competition for the Oscars, and well, from any awards really. But the reality is, the Lord of the Rings didn't win as many awards as it deserved. They completely overlooked the actors. Because they gave the most believable performances of those years. They were completely lived in, and they became the characters. You forget when you're watching Lord of the Rings that you're watching people just like me and you pretending. That's how good those films are. And the work on Gollum, remember, that was groundbreaking. The motion capture and performance was so far ahead of anything at that time. They basically had to bring in new awards to recognize it. That's how significant that was. And I've got to say, if you are making these comparisons, again, if you enjoyed it, well done, good, I'm glad. But if you are making the comparison between the Odyssey and Lord of the Rings, that you're completely disillusioned. Because you've convinced yourself that anything that Nolan touches is automatically profound and important when it isn't. You treat his films like as if they're philosophical statements instead of what they actually are, which is just flashy, slick films. And Nolan fans will mistake confusion for depth. How anyone can look at Lord of the Rings and go, "Oh, Nolan has matched or surpassed this." I think if you actually believe that, then you've forgotten what passion and craftsmanship looks like when it's not wrapped in prestige packaging. Jackson made something that still feels alive today. Nolan makes one expensive product after another, and this one will be forgot the moment the next big thing is released, which will be a Marvel film, no doubt. It's the whole modern audience sort of idea. It's horrible, but just stop comparing them, because Lord of the Rings is a genuine achievement that changed what was possible in cinema, and the Odyssey is just Chris Nolan making a Chris Nolan film, and he's filled it with people who were popular at the time. He didn't reach out for the best possible character actors. He's just gone for the most popular people at this moment. And the proof is that two of these people are going to be in the next big film that's out next month. Anyway, I'm kind of done talking. My throat is becoming really, really sore. I'm not used to speaking this much. Usually I talk about twice in an hour and not that. Anyway, if you do want to watch something good, please, as I said, give Hunt for the Wilder People a try. It's directed by Taika Waititi, and it's my favourite film by him. It's my favourite film starring Sam Neill. And at the same time, if you did like Sam Neill, check out his YouTube channel. I think it's called Two Paddocks. And it's just him on his farm. You see Sam Neill as a person. And yeah, it's incredibly sad that he passed away, because I think he was one of the best character actors out there. And a genuine good guy. You never ever heard anyone say anything negative about Sam Neill. And yeah, give it a try. And as a whole, give New Zealand films a try, because they tell incredible stories and they're worth watching and listening to. So thank you for your time. If I've offended you, so be it. But it's just my thoughts. you cannot compare the Odyssey with Lord of the Rings without laughing. Farewell and good night.